Hi, today I want to talk about source criticism, or I should call it source evaluation, because criticism has such negative connotations. We're not finding what's wrong with a source, we're finding what's right with a source. We're evaluating it, we're finding that source's value. Every source has values. The key is finding the limits of those values. In other words, you start with the idea that the source is valuable, and you try and determine how valuable that source is. What are the values? A historian uses the origin, the purpose, and the content of a source in order to establish what those values are and where the limits to those values are. So when we talk about origin, we're talking about things like who is the author? Not just what their name is, but who are they in relation to the events that we're talking about, the events that we're trying to understand? Are they a participant? Are they a reporter? Are they a historian looking back at those events? Who is that person? Those are the kinds of questions about origin. Who wrote it? When did they write it? That we want to really look at and try and understand. These are the kinds of questions we want to know about the producer of this source that we can find when we think about the origin of it. When was it produced? That's also part of the origin. Was it written at the time of the event, within a few days? Or was it years later, as a historian is looking back on those events? So for purpose, we're trying to ask the question, why was this source written? What were the reasons? What were the circumstances of it being written? When we talk about purpose, a lot of times what we're looking at is who the intended audience was. Who did they expect to read this source? For the content, we're looking at what is actually being said, but more specifically, what's being emphasized in this source. So when we evaluate a source, when we try and find the values of a source and the limitations of those values, we're looking at the origin, the purpose, and the content. Those are the things that we look at in order to figure out what the value of this source is for a historian studying a particular topic and what the limit of those values are. So now I want to talk about primary sources versus secondary sources. Primary sources are, of course, those sources that emerge from the time of an event that we're studying. Secondary sources are written by historians, and secondary sources by historians are coming from the primary sources. And they're using the primary sources as evidence. But they're taking those primary sources and they're putting it together to make a larger argument. A historical argument about cause, about consequence, about change over time, about continuity. They're emphasizing certain pieces of significance. One problem that I see students often do is they mistake the word primary for the word better. And they'll say things like, primary sources are valuable, secondary sources are limited. All sources have values. And what we're trying to find is where the limits of those values are. If you have any questions, put them in the comments and I'll try and answer them as best I can. Thanks for watching.